You may be carrying something. You may not have named it yet. It may live in the tightness of your shoulders, in the way your mind keeps returning to one particular thought tonight, in the faint but persistent sense that something remains unresolved. It might be an old hurt, a version of the past you keep returning to without meaning to, a person you can't seem to stop missing or can't seem to forgive, a worry about tomorrow that has already arrived tonight and taken up residence in the space behind your eyes. Whatever it is, you've been carrying it. And tonight, 8 stories are going to gently, one by one, show you what it might feel like to set it down. Not forever, not because it doesn't matter, but because you've been holding it long enough for one day, and your hands deserve to rest, and your mind deserves to find its quiet. If you'd like, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're resting tonight. People listen to these stories from every continent, every time zone, every kind of night. And there is something quietly beautiful about knowing that somewhere, right now, a person in Tokyo and a person in Sao Paulo and a person in a small town in the middle of a country you've never visited are all, at this moment, lying in the dark, letting go. Welcome. You're in the right place. Imagine, if you will, a monastery, not a grand one, not the kind that appears in photographs lit up dramatically for the tourists. A small one, settled into the foothills of a mountain range in Japan, the kind of place that has existed in the same forest for 800 years and does not seem to have noticed the centuries passing. Stone paths worn smooth by 10,000 sandaled feet. Wooden halls dark with age. Their rafters smelling of cedar and cold air, and the accumulated incense of 8 centuries of morning practice. The roof lines curve gently against the sky. The particular curve of old Japanese architecture, like something that has grown into that shape over time rather than being designed into it. It is dusk. The last light is leaving the sky, not dramatically, not in blazes of color, but quietly, the way a lamp is turned down low. One star has appeared above the eastern ridge, then 2, then 3. The forest is settling into its night sounds, the distant call of a bird returning to its tree, the soft percussion of a pine bough releasing its snow in a single white cascade onto the path below. Inside the main hall, a single oil lamp burns in a stone window. You can see its flame from the courtyard. Small, steady, unwavering, doing nothing but being itself. Around it, the wooden walls seem to absorb the light rather than reflect it, taking it in the way very old wood does, with patience, And then from somewhere deep in the monastery, a bell is struck, a brass bell, old, serious, round with years of use. Its tone doesn't ring so much as it spreads outward through the wooden halls, through the stone walls, through the cedar-scented air, past the courtyard and the stone path, and the forest and beyond, until it becomes too quiet to follow, but too resonant to forget. That tone is going to return tonight, softly, at intervals, the way something true returns to you at the moment when you most need to hear it. Each time it comes back, it will be a little quieter, a little more distant, until at last there is only the silence where the bell was. That silence is where we are going, but we arrive there slowly, through 8 stories drawn from traditions that have carried human beings through sleepless nights for 25 centuries. Zen, Theravada, Chan, the forest monasteries of Thailand, the tea houses of Japan, the riverbanks of ancient China, the simple rooms of masters who had learned, at great cost and with great care, how to put things down. Your job tonight is nothing more than to receive. Let the mattress hold your weight. Let your shoulders fall toward the bed. Let your jaw unclench. You may not have noticed it was clenched. Let your hands open, palms upward or downward, whichever feels like rest. There is nothing you need to figure out tonight. Whatever it is, it will wait. It has been waiting. And if it is truly urgent, you will rise in the morning with a rested mind and meet it clearly. But tonight it can wait. The first story begins now. Holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. Attributed to the Buddha in the Theravada tradition, there was a monk at Wat Pa Pong whose name was Bunchu, and he had been carrying something for 11 years. He was 34 when this story takes place. A serious, diligent monk with a clean robe and a practiced calm that had been built daily over more than a decade of forest monastery life. He rose before dawn. He sat through the long morning meditation with a stillness that the younger monks admired and sometimes tried to imitate. He moved through the monastery's rhythms, the formal meal, the afternoon work period, the evening chanting, with the ease of a man who has inhabited a routine long enough for it to become a second body. From the outside, Bunchu appeared to have found what most people who enter monasteries are looking for. Inside, something was burning. 11 years earlier, in his first year at the monastery, Bunchu had been assigned a practice partner, a senior monk named Fra Wirat. who had been at Wat Pa Pong for 6 years before Bunchu arrived. Fra Wirat was gifted. There was no other word for it. He sat with a stillness that looked to a new monk who was struggling with everything, like the effortless achievement of the thing Bunchu most wanted. Fra Wirat chanted with a voice that filled the hall without effort. When Ajahn Chah gave teachings, it was Wirat who seemed to receive them most fully, who asked the questions that landed most precisely, who offered the responses that made the old teacher nod with a quality of recognition. Bunchu had told himself during those first years that what he felt watching Wirat was not jealousy. He had found careful other names for it. Concern that Wirat's ease was superficial. Observation that his own slower progress was more genuine. A principled wariness of what he privately called spiritual performance. These names were precisely shaped to fit the feeling without exposing it. And then one afternoon during the rains retreat, Ajahn Chah had gathered a small group of monks for a private teaching. Bunchu had not been included. Fra Wirat had. It was a practical decision. The group was assembled by seniority, but Bunchu had not fully received it as a practical decision. He had received it as a verdict. And in the months and years that followed, the verdict had compounded, each new instance of Wirat's advancement adding another layer to the original. 11 years. Wat Pa Pong in the dry season was a precise kind of beautiful. The forest of northeastern Thailand thinned as the water withdrew, the trees taking on that gray-green quality that is specific to the dry season, their leaves dusty and patient, waiting. The paths through the monastery were swept clean each morning by the monks in rotation. The air smelled of red earth and wood smoke, and the faintest thread of incense from the main hall. And in the early morning, before the heat arrived, it was cool enough to feel like a reprieve. Ajahn Chah walked the monastery paths each morning after the meal period. This was known. The younger monks sometimes maneuvered to encounter him on these walks, not conspicuously, not in a way that could be called anything but ordinary, but with the careful positioning of people who understand that certain teachings are given only in motion, only in passing, only when the teacher moves past you on a morning path and says one thing that lands so precisely it reorganizes the rest of your life. Bunchu did not maneuver. He was on the path by accident, or by the kind of accident that carries within it all the inevitability of something that needed to happen. Ajahn Chah stopped beside him. He looked at Bunchu with the directness that made some monks uncomfortable, the sense of being fully seen, without the usual social padding between the seer and the seen. "You're carrying something," Ajahn Chah said. Bunchu felt the words land. He stood very still. Everyone carries something, he said carefully. Yes, Ajahn Chah said, but some things are heavier than others, and some things we carry them by choice, though we have forgotten making the choice. He reached down and picked up a small stone from the path, an ordinary stone, brown, unremarkable, the kind that has always been there and has never been noticed. Hold this for me, he said. Bunchu held it. It weighed almost nothing. Good, Ajahn Chah said. Now imagine holding it for 11 years. Bunchu looked at him. The specific number, 11 years, moved through him like the ring of a bell through a wooden hall. When we hold anger, Ajahn Chah said, we hold a coal, not a stone. A stone simply weighs. A coal burns. And the strange thing about the coal is this: the person we are burning for, the person we are saving this coal to throw, they don't feel it. The heat is ours. The burning is ours. We hold the coal and nurse it and protect it from going out. And the person we are holding it for walks through their life without noticing the fire. A bird called from somewhere in the forest. The morning light was coming through the trees in that specific early, dry season way. Golden, slanted, touching each leaf and shadow independently. Virat, Bunchu said. It was the first time he had said the name to anyone in the context of this feeling. It was the first time he had said it even to himself. I know, Ajahn Chah said. There was no judgment in this. There was no surprise. There was something more difficult to receive than either of those. Simple, unadorned recognition. He's a good monk, Bunchu said. The words were true, and saying them in this context cost something. Yes, Ajahn Chah said, and you are a good monk. That was never the question. The question was whether you would hold the coal until your hands burned through, or whether you would at some point put it down. Bunchu looked at the stone in his hands, the little brown stone, which had done nothing, which weighed almost nothing, which was simply a stone. How? He said. It isn't a decision I haven't already tried to make. No, Ajahn Chah said. Deciding isn't the same as releasing. Deciding is still holding, holding with the intention to release. Releasing is when the hand opens and the coal falls and you leave it on the ground. He paused. The morning sounds continued around them. The forest, the distant bell of the kitchen drum, the first stir of the monastery coming fully awake. The first step is this: see the coal for what it is. not an injustice, not a justified grievance, not a carefully maintained account of what was owed to you and not delivered. Just a coal, hot, burning, yours, and never his. He put it down long ago. You picked it up. You've been warming your hands on it ever since. And the warmth has become so familiar that releasing it feels like losing something. It does feel like that, Bunchu said. Yes, because you have been burning for 11 years, and burning is what you know. The cold of an open hand will feel, at first, like loss. A pause. Wait through the cold. The open hand is not a loss. It is the beginning of something. Ajahn Chah continued down the path. Bunchu stood where he was for a while, holding the little stone. Then he set it back on the path where he'd found it. That afternoon, during the work period, Bunchu and Fra Wirat were assigned to sweep the courtyard together. They worked in silence for a while. The rhythmic sound of the brooms on stone, the red dust rising and settling, the dry season heat. After a while, Bunchu said, "I've been unfair to you, in my mind, for a long time. I wanted you to know that." Wirat looked at him. He had a kind face, Bunchu noticed, genuinely kind, with the ease of a man who has never quite understood what others have against him, because he has mostly had nothing against others. "You don't need to say that," Wirat said. "I know," Bunchu said. "I'm saying it because it's true." They swept the rest of the courtyard together. The brooms moved back and forth. The dust rose and fell. The afternoon light moved across the stone in its slow arc. Nothing was fixed exactly. The years were the years. The feelings were the feelings. But something in Bunchu's chest, something dense and specific and very hot, was no longer there in the same way. It had become, in the language of the tradition, simply an old thing, something that had been carried and was now being set down, something that was already slowly cooling. In the Buddhist tradition, this is called releasing upadana, the clinging, the grasping, the compulsive holding on that transforms ordinary pain into chronic suffering. The Buddha taught that suffering arises not from what happens to us, but from our attachment to how it happened, our insistence on the account, on the debt, on the version of events we've been nursing into permanence. The coal is the grievance we have decided must not be allowed to cool. A woman once told me she had been angry at her sister for 17 years over something that had happened at their mother's funeral, a comment made in grief that her sister had almost certainly already forgotten. 17 years. She had rehearsed that comment so many times she could recite it word for word. She had organized around it a whole architecture of distance and estrangement. I didn't know, she said, that I was the one keeping it alive. I thought she was the one not apologizing. I didn't see that I was the one holding the flame. When she finally let it cool, not by confrontation, not by any dramatic resolution, but simply by stopping the rehearsal, by choosing not to pick the coal up one more time. She described the feeling as like putting down a bag I'd forgotten I was carrying. Right now, as you rest, is there a coal, a grievance, an old hurt, a version of an event that you have preserved with great care and returned to regularly? You don't have to resolve it tonight. You only need to notice whether your hands are warm from holding it. That noticing is already the beginning of the opening. Tonight, as you rest, let this thought settle gently into you. The coal is not evidence of the wrong that was done. It is evidence only of how long you have been holding it. The wrong happened. The coal is yours. You can set it down now. Not because it didn't matter, not because you weren't hurt, but because your hands deserve to be cool. Because the open hand is not emptiness, it is room. Room for rest. Room for the next thing that wants to arrive. Room for the specific peace that comes when we stop protecting the wound and begin slowly, quietly, to allow it to close. The brass bell rings somewhere in the monastery. Its tone spreads through the wooden halls, through the cedar air, out past the courtyard, and into the forest where the dry season trees stand patient in the dark. Let the tone carry whatever you're holding. Let it spread outward. Let it go. And so the first story rests. Sit with that for a moment. 11 years. We can smile at that, gently, the way you smile at something that is also about yourself. Because most of us are carrying something we picked up much longer ago than we think. And most of us have never set it down, not because we can't, but because we haven't yet found the moment that felt like permission. Let this be that moment. Breathe in slowly for a count of 4. Feel your chest rise. Feel your ribs expand slightly against the mattress beneath you. Hold it gently for just a beat and breathe out. Long, slow, complete. Feel your body press a little more fully into the bed, like something releasing its grip. That is the body beginning to let go. The bell is sounding still, just slightly more distant than before, its tone spreading a little further, becoming a little more quiet. Still present, still patient. The second story comes from Japan, from a muddy river crossing on a rainy morning, and a question that one monk carried for miles without knowing he was carrying it at all. The second story begins. We do not see things as they are. We see things as we are. Nan-in, echoing a Talmudic teaching that found its way into the Zen tradition. In the mountains of rural Japan, there was a road that followed a river for 20 miles, before crossing it at a ford where the water ran shallow over broad, flat stones. This crossing was well known among the monks of the region. In summer, it was a simple matter, the water barely reaching the knee. But in the spring rainy season, and occasionally in autumn after the heavy rains, the river swelled and the crossing became something else. Waist deep, cold, the current insistent, the footing uncertain beneath the rushing water. This story takes place in autumn, the kind of autumn that Japan does with such particular melancholy. The maples just past their peak, their crimson going brown at the edges, the leaves releasing in slow spirals from the branches overhead and accumulating on the road in wet, darkened layers. The sky, a consistent gray. The rain not heavy, but persistent. The kind of rain that soaks slowly and thoroughly into everything it touches. 2 monks were walking from their mountain temple to a monastery in the valley below. The older monk's name was Ajahn. He had been a monk for 31 years, and he wore that time lightly, the way certain people wear their ages, as something acquired gradually and carried without weight. The younger monk's name was Ryoichi. He was 26, and he had been practicing for 4 years. And he had the earnestness of a person who is fully committed to something and has not yet had to reckon with the parts of himself that he brought to the commitment. They walked mostly in silence. This was normal. The monastery's rules of conduct while traveling were simple. Maintain awareness of the body. Maintain awareness of the breath. Speak only when necessary. The road was familiar enough to both of them that it required very little of the thinking mind. The feet moved. The rain fell. The maples released their leaves in slow falling arcs. When they reached the ford, they found the river higher than usual. Not dangerously high, passable, certainly, but enough that crossing it would mean a wet robe. The kind of thing that a traveling monk accepts without much thought as one of the textures of traveling. At the ford, standing at the edge of the swollen water and looking across, with an expression of clear unhappiness, was a woman. She was young, perhaps 20, perhaps a little older, well dressed, her clothes the kind that were not made to get wet, with the embroidery and the fabric that spoke of a family with enough money to care about such things. She had been standing at the river's edge long enough that her wooden sandals had sunk slightly into the mud. She looked at the brown rushing water with the expression of someone for whom this crossing represented a real problem, not an adventure, not an inconvenience, but an actual obstacle standing between her and something necessary. She did not ask for help. This was important. In the custom of the time and the region, a woman of her class would not have asked two monks for physical assistance. The social architecture around such things was elaborate and clearly understood by everyone within it. Ajahn did not hesitate. He waded to her side, said a few quiet words, and then, with the matter-of-fact ease of a man doing something practical and unremarkable, he lifted her and carried her across the river. The water was waist-deep on him, cold and fast. He moved through it steadily, found his footing on the flat stones, and set her down on the far bank without ceremony. She bowed to him, deeply, with an expression that was gratitude and embarrassment in equal measure. He bowed back. She continued on her way. Ajahn and Ryoichi waded across together, the water cold against their robes, and continued on the road. Ryoichi said nothing. He walked. The road continued through the valley, descending toward the town and the monastery below. The rain fell. The maples continued their quiet release of leaves. Ryoichi walked in silence, but it was not the silence of the monastery rules. It was the silence of a mind that is very busy and has decided not to speak. He was thinking about what he had seen. He was thinking about the rule, clear in every version of the Vinaya, the monastic code that governed a monk's conduct, that a monk did not touch a woman. He was thinking about Ajah's ease, and whether that ease was the ease of wisdom or the ease of someone who had simply decided to exempt himself from the rules he found inconvenient. He was thinking about whether he should say something, and whether saying something would be right action or presumptuous judgment. He was thinking about what it meant that Ajahn seemed so completely unbothered by what he had done, and whether that unbothered quality was genuine or performed. He thought about this for miles. The road descended. The town appeared. They entered the monastery's outer gate and removed their sandals and dried their robes and took tea in the common room where a fire was burning against the autumn cold. Ajahn sat across from Ryoichi in the firelight, his hands around his tea bowl, looking comfortable and present in the way of someone who has had a good walk in good rain and is now sitting by a good fire. Ryoichi looked at the fire for a while. Then he said, "Teacher, this morning, at the river, the woman." Ajahn looked at him. "We are monks," Ryoichi said. "We do not touch women. You carried her. Since the river, I have been thinking about this. Ajahn looked at him for a moment. Then his expression did something that was not quite a smile. I set her down at the riverbank, he said. Why are you still carrying her? Ryochi opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at the fire. The fire had not changed. The tea was the same tea. The room was the same room. But something in it had shifted. The way a picture shifts when you look at it from a different angle and realize you have been seeing only part of it. He had been carrying her all afternoon, for miles through the rain and the declining road and the entrance to the monastery. He had been carrying her, not in his arms, in his mind. He had built around the image of Ajahn lifting her an entire architecture of judgment, concern, and opinion. He had rehearsed it. He had refined it. He had sharpened its edges. Ajahn had touched the river for the time it took to cross it, and then he had set it down. Ryoichi had not touched the river at all, and he had been in it ever since. I was judging him, Ryoichi said quietly to himself as much as to Ajahn. Yes, Ajahn said, and there is nothing wrong with noticing. The noticing is good. The noticing is how we learn. But there is a difference between noticing and carrying. When you notice and then set it down, the mind is clean. When you notice and then carry it for 3 hours through the rain, adding to it as you go, the mind is occupied. And an occupied mind is not a practicing mind. He finished his tea. What I did at the river, whether it was right or wrong, that is a question worth sitting with, and I welcome it. But sit with it now, in this room, by this fire, not on the road, not in the middle of the crossing. The mind that judges must also know how to put the judgment down when the walking has to be walked. They sat in silence for a while. The fire settled. The rain continued on the roof, softer now, a gentler percussion, the autumn rain becoming more patient as the evening deepened. Ryoichi thought about this for years. Not continuously, not the way he had carried it on the road, but in the way that a teaching returns to you at intervals, each time a little cleaner, a little more understood. He encountered many versions of the same river crossing in the years that followed. Moments when his mind grabbed something and began building around it, adding layers, carrying a thought miles past where it needed to go. Each time, he heard Aishin's quiet question. I set her down at the riverbank. Why are you still carrying her? In the Buddhist tradition, this is vitarka, the discursive, proliferating thinking that takes a moment and extends it into an architecture of commentary, the mind's habit of taking what it has perceived, and not simply observing it, but adding to it, subtracting from it, comparing it, judging it, narrating it, and then carrying that narration into the next hour and the next day. The Buddha described this in the Madhupindika Sutta. Contact arises, perception arises. What one has perceived, one thinks about. What one thinks about, one proliferates about. And the proliferation is the suffering, not the original contact, not the original seeing, but the miles of road we walk while continuing to carry what we picked up at the river. A man once told me he had spent the better part of a year reviewing a conversation he'd had with his father. Not a dramatic conversation, a brief exchange over a holiday meal in which his father had said something dismissive about his work. The conversation had lasted perhaps 2 minutes. The carrying of it had lasted 11 months. Each time he revisited it, the original 2 minutes grew slightly heavier, slightly more definitive, slightly more central to the story he was telling himself about the relationship. It got, he said, way bigger in my memory than it ever was in the room. That is vitarka. That is the carrying, the original event, the original contact. That is simply what it was. Everything after that is the road we walk while still holding it. Right now, as you rest, is there something you've been carrying in your mind since it happened? A conversation that ended hours ago, a look someone gave you, a thing that was said or not said or done or not done. Notice how much larger it has become since the original moment. Notice how much road you have walked while holding it. Tonight, as you rest, let your mind do what Ajahn did at the riverbank. Set it down on the far shore. The crossing is over. You are dry. The fire is warm. The mind that is not carrying anything is the mind that can receive the rest it has been asking for. You don't need to resolve it. You don't need to decide anything about it. You only need to notice that you're still holding it and allow your hands, the hands of the mind, to open. The river is already behind you. The monastery is here. The fire is warm and steady, and the rain on the roof is saying only one thing, over and over in its quiet, patient voice. Rest, rest, rest. The bell sounds in the distance, fainter now, its tone spreading out over the valley and the river and the road that disappears into the rain, fainter and fainter still, but present. And so the second story rests. I set her down at the riverbank. Why are you still carrying her? Let that question rest with you for a moment, without urgency, without needing an answer tonight. Notice your breathing. It's probably slower now than when we started. That's the body finding its way down. doing what it knows how to do when you give it a little space. Breathe in, long and full, and breathe out, longer than the in-breath, the exhale, always carrying more than the inhale. The bell is a little further away now. You can still hear it if you listen. Still that same steady, patient tone, still present. The third story comes from ancient China, from a ferryman on a wide river and an empty boat, and the discovery that what makes us angry says more about us than about whatever is on the other end of the anger. The third story begins. The whole world is medicine. What is the self? Yunmen Wenyan, Chan Master. In the days of the great river settlements of central China, there was a ferryman named Wei, who worked a wide, slow bend of the Han River. The river at this bend was broad, perhaps 300 paces from bank to bank, and the current was moderate, and on most days the light on the water was the particular pale gold of a sky that is not quite clear and not quite cloudy, the kind of light that makes everything look slightly more significant than it is. Wei had been ferrying people across this water for 22 years. He had started young, inheriting the family's flat-bottomed boat and its route from his father, who had inherited it from his father before him. 3 generations of Weiss on this bend of the Han River, pushing the same long pole against the same river bottom, watching the same light change over the same water. Wei was, by the standards of his life and time, a contented man. He had a wife, 3 grown children, a modest house set back from the river's floodplain, a steady trade. He was not a philosophical man. He had not studied the classics, had not sat at the feet of any teacher, had not traveled beyond the region he had been born in. But he had spent 22 years in conversation with a large river, and rivers teach certain things by proximity that no teacher can convey by instruction. He had learned patience the way a stone learns smoothness, not by deciding to be patient, but by being in the presence of moving water long enough that the quality worked its way in. He had learned, or thought he had learned, something about accepting what comes. Sunny days, days of hard rain when the river surged and the crossing was work, days when no one wanted to cross and the money was thin, days of argument with difficult passengers, days of quiet with passengers who sat in the stern and looked at the water and said nothing all the way across. He took what came, or so he believed. But there was something about Wei that did not know this about itself yet. Wei had a temper, not a violent one, not a temper that expressed itself in raised voices or broken things. A quiet temper, inward, held. When passengers were rude, and they were occasionally the entitled ones who treated the ferryman as furniture, he felt a hot, specific presence in his chest that took hours to dissipate. When someone was late and held up the crossing without apology, the heat arrived. When another boat cut across his path without acknowledgement, the heat arrived. He managed these moments competently, speaking nothing of what he felt, but he carried the heat of them through the day, sometimes through the following day, sometimes longer. He did not think of this as a problem. He thought of it as normal, as what a person feels when they are treated inconsiderately, as proof that what had happened was genuinely inconsiderate, and that his feeling was proportionate and justified. One afternoon in early summer, the river was busy with traffic. Market day upstream had ended, and the boats were moving in both directions. Traders, families, occasional officials, in their lacquered craft sitting high in the water. Wei was returning from a crossing with an empty boat, heading upstream along the near bank to pick up the next group of passengers waiting at the landing. He was moving at a good pace, the pole driving the flat bottom smoothly through the water, his mind on the rhythm of the work. The afternoon was warm. The river smelled of mud and green growing things, and the particular mineral smell of water that has traveled a long distance to get where it is. And then another boat struck him. It came from upstream, moving fast, drifting with the current and slightly out of control in the way of a boat that has no one managing it properly. It hit Wei's boat with a solid, sudden impact, the kind of jolt that moves through the wood and into the body, that costs him his footing for a moment, that sends his pole scraping sideways against the bottom. It was not a dangerous collision. No one was hurt. No damage was done beyond a small gouge in the wood of the gunwale, but it was abrupt and undignified, and Wei felt the hot, specific presence in his chest arrive with its usual immediacy. He steadied himself. He looked up, ready to say something, the words already forming, the precise calibration of justified rebuke that he had developed over 22 years of dealing with inconsiderate river traffic. The boat was empty. No pilot. No passenger. A loose boat, come free from whatever mooring had held it upstream, drifting on the current. Wei stood with his pole and looked at the empty boat as it turned slowly in the current and continued downstream. The heat in his chest was still there. The words were still formed, but there was no one to say them to. And in that absence, that specific absence of a target, something opened in Wei's thinking that had never opened quite this way before. He had been angry at a boat, not at a rude person, not at an inconsiderate trader or an oblivious official, at a boat, an empty, purposeless, drifting thing that had bumped against his because the river had taken it in that direction. The boat had no malice. The boat had no awareness. The boat was simply a boat, doing what the current told it to do. And the heat in his chest was where was it going now? It was still there. It had nowhere to go. It was simply heat, without a target, burning for nothing, costing him something without purchasing anything at all. He stood on the water for a long moment. He was thinking, and the thought was strange and new and slightly uncomfortable, about all the times he had been angry at boats that were not empty, about the traders who had cut his path, and the passengers who had been late, and the officials who had treated him as furniture, about all the times he had felt the hot, specific presence arrive and had been certain, entirely certain, that it was appropriate and proportionate and justified. But what if they were also empty boats, not empty of personhood, not empty of their own feelings and intentions and histories, but empty, perhaps, of any intention toward him? What if the trader who cut his path had not seen him? What if the late passenger had had a reason he hadn't thought to explain? What if the official in the lacquered boat had been so absorbed in his own anxiety about the meeting upstream that he hadn't registered the ferryman at all? What if all of them were empty boats, traveling on their own currents, and he had been boarding each one with his hot, specific presence and his precisely calibrated words, and they had been, in every meaningful sense, already gone downstream. Wei sat down in his boat. He let it drift for a moment, which he had not done in 22 years of careful work. He looked at the water. He thought about his wife, who occasionally said something that landed badly, something that felt, in the moment, like a small, deliberate wound. Was she an empty boat? He thought about his eldest son, who had moved to the city and rarely wrote. Empty boat? He thought about the village headman who had, 2 seasons ago, made a decision about the landing rights that had cost Wei money. Empty boat? He was not sure. He could not be sure. Some boats had people in them, and the people had intended what they did. But he noticed, and this was new and strange and oddly peaceful, that whether they were empty boats or piloted ones, the heat in his chest was his. The burning was his. The carrying of it through the afternoon, and sometimes the following day, and sometimes longer, that was his. And he was doing it to himself, not because an empty boat had struck him, and not even because a piloted boat had struck him, but because he had picked up the heat and decided to carry it. In the Taoist and Chan traditions, this insight arrives through the image of the empty boat. Chuang-Tzu described it in his inner chapters. If you are crossing the river, and an empty boat drifts into yours, you feel no anger. If there is a person in the boat, you shout, but the collision is exactly the same. Only the story is different. And the story you tell about who caused the collision and whether it was intentional and what it means about them and what it means about you, that is anatta, the teaching of non-self, applied to anger. The collision happened. The self that was offended, the self that insists on being the one that was wronged, the self that carries the heat and builds the case. The self is a construction. It is not a fixed thing. It is a habit. And like all habits, it can be recognized. And what is recognized clearly can be changed. A woman once told me she spent 15 minutes every morning in the shower reliving a disagreement she'd had with a neighbor 6 months earlier. 15 minutes every morning relitigating something that was over. I kept winning the argument, she said, but I never felt better. I'd just start on the next one. She had not seen until she sat with this that she was the one choosing to hold the argument open. The neighbor had moved on. The disagreement was over. She was every morning climbing into an empty boat and having a fight with it right now. As you rest, is there an empty boat? Something or someone you are still in argument with, still building your case against, still carrying the heat for? Is it possible, just possible, just worth considering that the boat has been empty for a while and the heat has been yours, burning in your chest, not because of what was done, but because of the story you have kept lit around what was done. Tonight, as you rest, let the boat drift downstream, not because the collision didn't happen. It did. Not because the feeling wasn't real. It was, and it is. But the river is long and wide and entirely indifferent to the heat we carry on it. And your boat can be still while theirs continues on. And the stillness is not defeat. It is the end of a long, unnecessary crossing. The empty boat moves downstream in the summer afternoon. The current is steady. The light on the water is gold. Your boat is still. Breathe. The bell sounds again, further away now, its tone thinner, spreading over a wider silence, still present, barely. And so the third story rests. The empty boat drifting downstream. Let that image move through you for a moment. The wide river, the still water, your boat not moving, the summer light gold on the surface, the other boat already far downstream, already past the bend, already gone from sight. You are not following it. Your body is heavier now than when we started. Heavier in the good way, in the way that means the day is releasing its hold on you. Notice that weight, the pleasant, real weight of a body that is beginning to give itself over to rest. Let your legs sink into the mattress. Let your hips settle. Let your spine lengthen gently, softly, as though it is slowly learning that it does not need to hold itself up tonight. Breathe in, long and full, all the way down into the lower belly, and breathe out, longer than the in-breath, the exhale always carrying more than the inhale took in. The fourth story comes from a forest monastery in Thailand. It is about a young monk and a stone, and the most direct teaching that Ajahn Chah ever gave on the practice of letting go. The fourth story begins. If you let go a little, you will have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you will have a lot of peace. If you let go completely, you will have complete peace. Ajahn Chah. There was a young monk at Wat Pa Pong, and his name was Somchai, and he was 20 years old, and he was struggling. He had come to the monastery from a village in Surin province, the second son of a rice farmer who it seemed, when Somchai said he wanted to become a monk, both surprised and entirely unsurprised, as though this was something he had always half expected. Somchai's mother had wept at the ordination and then smiled. His father had said nothing during the ceremony, but had pressed his son's hands very tightly when saying goodbye, which was more than he usually said about anything. Somchai was sincere. This should be said clearly from the beginning, so there is no misunderstanding. He had not come to the monastery to avoid something or to please someone. He had come because something in the teaching, when he first heard it at 19, had sounded like something he had been trying to say for years without the words for it. The teaching on impermanence, the question of how to live without being destroyed by the things that happen in a life. The teaching on the nature of mind, that the mind is not a fixed thing, not an enemy, but something that can be trained the way a garden can be tended. These were his questions. The monastery was where people sat with them, but sincerity is not the same as skill. And Somchai's meditation was difficult from the beginning. He sat every morning and every evening in the meditation hall, and his mind did what minds do when they are asked to be still. It did not cooperate. It moved through its favorite subjects, the way a person moves through a room they know in the dark, automatically, without needing to choose the route, the family he had left, the question of whether he had made the right choice, the discomfort in his left knee that arrived reliably after 20 minutes of sitting, a fragment of a song that emerged from nowhere and could not be dislodged. A memory from 3 years ago that had no apparent bearing on anything but presented itself for examination with great urgency. He counted his breaths as he had been instructed. 1, 2, 3, 4. He arrived at 6 and realized he had been thinking about the song again and had not been counting at all, only performing the shape of counting while the mind did something else entirely. He was embarrassed by this. The monks around him in the hall sat with a quality of composed stillness that suggested they were doing something genuinely different from what he was doing, something more advanced, more correct. He was failing at the central practice of his chosen life, and doing so consistently and thoroughly, and no one had told him yet that this was not failure, that this noticing, this returning, was itself the practice. No one had told him yet because he had not asked, and he had not asked because he was ashamed to reveal the extent of his difficulty. He was, in other words, carrying the struggle, carrying the judgment of himself, carrying the gap between who he was and who he thought he should be, and adding to it daily, the way the grief added weight to itself with each session that went the way the previous one had gone. Ajahn Chah at this time was in his middle years, vigorous, deeply present, with the quality of attention that students described as both challenging and profoundly accepting. He taught not from a position above his students, but from within their actual lives, finding the teaching in the material that each person brought. He was said to see people clearly, not their presentations, not the careful, orderly surfaces that people construct over their actual experience, but the experience itself, the place beneath the performance. One morning in the dry season, February, the air clear and sharp, the forest sounds carrying cleanly through the cold. Ajahn Chah appeared during the walking meditation period. He stood for a moment watching Somchai walk. Then he said, "Come with me." Somchai followed, uncertain whether he was in trouble. The path led through the monastery grounds and into the forest along a trail that wound between the large old trees. The light came through the canopy in long slanted shafts, specific and golden, the way dry season light in the Thai forest is, as though each beam has a destination. They came to a place where a large stone sat beside a dry stream bed. It was gray-white, smooth from old waterwork, about the size of a generous melon, substantial, dense in the way of stones that have been on the earth for a long time. "Pick this up," Ajahn Chah said. Somchai picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, perhaps 15 kilograms, perhaps more. The weight settled into his arms and shifted his center of balance, and immediately announced itself as something that would require sustained effort to maintain. "Walk with me," Ajahn Chah said. They walked. The trail continued through the forest. They walked back through the monastery grounds, along the path between the monks' quarters, past the meditation hall around the main courtyard. Somchai carried the stone. Ajahn Chah walked beside him, his hands folded comfortably in front of him, his pace unhurried, as though he had no particular destination and no particular schedule. He said nothing. After 15 minutes, Somchai's arms had begun to register the weight in a specific and sustained way. The stone had not grown heavier. He understood this intellectually, but his body's ability to hold it at the same steady posture was diminishing. He adjusted his grip. He shifted the stone slightly. Neither adjustment helped for more than a few paces. "Teacher," he said, with the careful tone of someone who is not sure whether asking is permitted, "may I set it down?" "Not yet," Ajahn Chah said. They continued. The path went past the kitchen garden, where the morning's work was being done, where the smell of wood smoke and cooking rice moved through the morning air. Somchai's arms were now seriously complaining. The weight was no longer registering as weight, but as something more insistent. A burn moving up from the forearms toward the shoulders, the spine beginning to curve slightly forward under the sustained effort of holding the stone at the right height. "Teacher," he said again, with less careful tone and more honest urgency, "I need to put it down." "Tell me first," Ajahn Chah said, still walking, still unhurried, "how it feels to hold it." "Heavy," Somchai said, "like my arms ache, like it is too much." "Yes," Ajahn Chah said. "And how long have you been carrying it?" "Perhaps 30 minutes. "Yes," Ajahn Chah said again. "Now put it down." Somchai set the stone on the earth. The relief was extraordinary, not only physical, though it was intensely physical, moving through the arms and the back and the chest in a wave of release that was genuinely pleasurable. But beneath the physical relief, something else, a lightness that was more than the absence of weight, a clarity, a sense of the whole body remembering what it was like to simply be upright without the sustained effort of carrying something heavy. He stood there for a moment, just receiving it. Ajahn Chah looked at him. "How does that feel?" he asked. "Like relief," Somchai said. "Like I didn't know how much I was carrying until I put it down. My whole body is different." "Yes." Ajahn Chah found a nearby log and sat on it with the ease of a man who has always been comfortable in forests. He looked at the stone, still sitting on the earth where Somchai had set it, already resuming its quality of simply being a stone. "Now tell me, what else you are carrying. Chai was quiet for a moment. My practice, he said. The worry about whether it is correct, whether I am making progress, whether I am failing at something I chose and cannot afford to fail at. Yes, the gap between who I am and who I think I should be. Yes, the things people said to me before I came here, the doubts they had, the doubt that I have. Yes, Ajahn Chah said, all of that. And you are carrying all of it the same way you carried the stone, continuously, without setting it down, until your arms shake and your back aches, and you still don't put it down because you have decided that carrying it is necessary, that it is part of the practice, that a monk who was doing it correctly would be able to carry it without noticing the weight. Chai looked at the stone on the ground. But some of it is necessary to carry, he said. Some of it is genuine attention to the practice. Some, Ajahn Chah agreed. A little, enough. But you are carrying far more than a little. He paused. A bird moved through the canopy overhead, its flight briefly visible through the leaves. If you let go a little, you will have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you will have a lot of peace. If you let go completely, you will have complete peace. He let those words sit in the forest air. Complete peace, Chai said. Yes, that is what the practice is for. Not to achieve something, not to accumulate something, not to arrive at a condition called progress and be judged as satisfactory. The practice is this: to put down what you no longer need to carry only what is genuinely required, and to carry even that with loose hands. They sat in the forest for a while. The dry season light moved slowly through the canopy. The stone sat on the earth between them, ordinary and unremarkable, completely unbothered by the conversation happening around it. What made you choose me for this today? Chai asked. Ajahn Chah looked at him with an expression that was fond and slightly amused. I watched you this morning in walking meditation, he said. Your face, while you walked, had the same expression you had while holding the stone. The effort, the resistance, the calculation of how much longer you could keep going. You were doing walking meditation the same way most people carry a heavy stone, gripping it tightly, leaning slightly forward, working very hard against something that did not require that much work. Chai absorbed this. The walking meditation requires a light grip, Ajahn Chah said. The sitting requires a light grip. The practice, the whole of it, a light grip. Hold it the way you'd hold a small bird, firmly enough that it doesn't fly away, loosely enough that you don't crush it. They walked back to the monastery together. The stone remained in the forest. Chai's arms were still slightly sore. the good sore of muscles that had been asked to do something real and had done it. But the rest of his body was loose and light in a way it had not been for months. He would forget this. He would pick things up again, as we all do. This is the practice. Not a single act of putting down, but a lifelong returning to the question, what am I carrying? And do I still need to carry it? The returning is the practice. The setting down and the picking up and the setting down again. This is not failure. This is what being a human being engaged with a practice looks like from the inside. But on that morning, in that particular quality of forest light, with the stone still visible on the earth behind him, and his arms remembering what relief felt like, he was, for a moment, carrying almost nothing at all. And Ajahn Chah's words arrived in him the way water arrives in a dry riverbed, not with noise or drama, but with a quality of settling into the exact shape of the thing that has been waiting for it. In the Buddhist tradition, this is viraga, dispassion, the joy of release, not the cold withdrawal of someone who no longer cares, but the warm, clear quality of someone who cares about the right things, held with the right lightness, the joy of the open hand, the peace of not carrying what was never yours to carry permanently. A teacher I know describes it this way: we mistake our burdens for our identity. We have been carrying this particular stone for so long that we have forgotten it is a stone. We think it is us, and so we do not put it down, not because we can't, but because we don't know who we would be without the weight of it. Right now, as you rest, what have you been carrying that has begun to feel like you? Some worry or grievance or expectation or identity that you have held for so long, it has become a companion, not a welcome companion, but a familiar one. The familiar heaviness you know how to carry because you have been carrying it for years. You can set it down tonight, not permanently. You don't have to promise anything about forever, just for tonight, just for the length of sleep. Set it here, beside the bed. It will be there in the morning if you still want it. But your arms don't need to hold it while you sleep. Tonight, as you rest, let the stone return to the earth. Let it sit on the dark ground and be simply what it is: a stone, not a burden, an ordinary thing that the forest has been holding without effort for 10,000 years and will continue to hold long after you have moved on. Your hands are empty. Feel how light that is. The bell sounds again, barely audible now, its tone stretched thin across the distance, touching you like something heard just before sleep, just at the edge, just there. And so the fourth story rests. A light grip. Hold it the way you would hold a small bird, firmly enough that it does not fly away, loosely enough that you do not crush it. Let that settle, not as an instruction for tomorrow, not as something to practice or achieve or demonstrate, just as an image, warm and quiet and genuinely available, that you can carry lightly into sleep. Your breath is slower now, your body heavier, the good heaviness of a person who is genuinely resting, not performing rest, not managing rest, but actually bodily coming to rest. Let the mattress do more of the work. Let the pillow take more of the weight. Let your face go a little softer around the eyes and the jaw. The fifth story comes from ancient India, from the Buddha himself, from a parable about a raft and a river and the strange persistence with which we carry even the things that helped us get somewhere, long after we have already arrived on the far shore. The fifth story begins. Monks, I will teach you the Dhamma compared to a raft, for the purpose of crossing over, not for the purpose of holding on to. The Buddha, Alagadupama Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 22. There was a traveler named Dani who had been walking for 3 days through the great forest, the forest of ancient India, before the cities expanded and the roads multiplied and the wild places contracted into the remnants we now protect. Was a different kind of place than we can easily imagine. Deep, dense, the kind of forest that is not interested in human beings, that does not acknowledge their presence or absence. Trees that had been growing since before the villages had been built. Undergrowth thick enough to lose a path in. The sounds of animals that were not seen, only heard, moving through the darkness between the trees. Dani had entered the forest 3 days earlier on his way between 2 towns. He knew the general direction. He did not know the specific path because the person who had given him directions had not been into the forest in many years, and the forest had changed. Paths had narrowed. The stream crossing he had been told to use had shifted with the last floods, and there was now water where there had been no water. He had navigated around and through and back, and around again using the sun during the day and the stars at night. And he had arrived on the afternoon of the 3rd day at the bank of a wide, deep river. The river was not on his map, or rather, it was on his map in the approximate way that rivers had been mapped before anyone had actually measured them. He had known there would be a river. He had not known how wide it would be. It was perhaps 200 paces from bank to bank, and it was running high from recent rains, and the current in the center looked strong and unpredictable. He could not swim well. This was a practical problem. He stood at the bank and thought. The opposite bank was clearly visible. Beyond it, the forest thinned into farmland. He could see the different quality of the light, the openness of it, the hint of cultivated fields. The town was not far beyond that. He was almost at the end of the forest. He was perhaps an hour from shelter and food and rest. And between him and that hour was 200 paces of deep, fast water. He walked along the bank and gathered materials. Fallen wood, large enough to support his weight. Vines to lash the logs together. He worked for several hours until the afternoon light had gone golden and the shadows of the bank trees had lengthened across the water. He built a raft, not a beautiful one, not a stable one, but a functional one, large enough to hold him and his pack and his staff, with enough buoyancy to keep him above the water for the time the crossing would take. He crossed. The crossing was difficult. The current was stronger than it had looked, and twice he nearly lost his grip on the makeshift steering post, but he managed it. He arrived on the far bank, wet and exhausted, the raft battered from the crossing, spinning slowly in the eddy, behind the large stone that had protected him in the final moments. He stood on the bank. He looked at the raft, sodden and battered, turning in the eddy. And then, and this is the moment the story turns on, he lifted it onto his shoulders. It was very heavy, heavier wet than it had been dry. It pressed down on his shoulders and bent him slightly forward. He began walking toward the road that would take him to the town. A farmer working in the field above the bank watched this. "Friend," the farmer called, "why are you carrying the raft?" Dunny stopped. He looked at the raft on his shoulders. He looked at the dry road ahead. "It helped me cross the river," he said. "Yes," the farmer said, "and now you are on the other side. There is no more river. Why are you carrying it?" Donnie had no answer. He had not thought about this. He had built the raft to cross the river, and the raft had served its purpose, and now he was carrying it because it had served its purpose, because it had been useful, because he was grateful to it in some obscure way that he had not examined, because he was afraid, perhaps, that there might be another river. There were other rivers, always, but he could not know where they were. He could not know their width or depth. He could not know whether this particular raft would be the right one for them. And between him and the first step toward the town, there was only a dry road. And on that dry road, he was carrying something that had done its work and needed only to be put down. He set the raft on the bank. He walked on. The Buddha told this parable to his monks in the Alagadupama Sutta, one of the most important parables in the entire Pali Canon, and one of the most often misunderstood. When the monks first hear it, some of them are troubled. The raft in the parable is the Dharma itself, the teachings, the practice, the entire edifice of Buddhism that the monks have devoted their lives to. And the Buddha is saying, when you have crossed the river, set even this down. This troubles people who have organized their lives around the teachings. How can you set down the Dharma? How can you set down the thing that is most true, most valuable, most precious to you? But the Buddha was pointing at something more subtle than this. He was not saying that the teachings are worthless. He was saying that even the most useful and true thing becomes a burden when we carry it past the point of its usefulness. When we stop using the teachings to cross the river and start using them to prove that we are the kind of person who carries the raft, that is when the Dharma itself becomes upadana, clinging. This applies to more than Buddhist doctrine. It applies to every belief, every identity, every story we have been using to navigate our lives. We build rafts to get across particular rivers. A belief in our own strength, built to get us through a period of great difficulty. A story of ourselves as someone who does not need help, built during a time when asking for help was genuinely dangerous. A habit of control, built when the world was truly out of control and vigilance was required. A wall of distance, built when closeness had cost too much. All of these are rafts. All of them worked. All of them got us across the river we were facing at the time. But the river is behind us now, and we are still carrying the raft. The town is ahead. The road is dry, and we are bent forward under the weight of something that has finished its work. Donnie, our traveler back on the road above the bank, felt the relief of the set-down raft in a very specific way, not as loss, not as emptiness, as lightness, as the recovery of a posture that the weight of carrying had bent, as the return of a stride that the effort of carrying had shortened, as, and this is the essential thing, as a readiness, an availability, a quality of openness to what the dry road had to offer that had not been available while the raft was on his shoulders. He arrived in the town by evening. He found food and a room and a fire. He sat by the fire and thought about the river, about the raft he had built, the crossing he had managed, the farmer's question he had not been able to answer. He was glad he had built the raft. He was glad he had learned to build it. Somewhere, in some future forest, there would be another river, and the knowing of how to build a raft would be genuinely useful. But between now and then, he did not need to carry one. In the Buddhist tradition, this is upadana applied to beliefs and identities. the clinging not just to objects or relationships, but to the very frameworks we have used to understand the world. We are all, always, in the middle of a crossing or just arriving on the far bank. The skill is in knowing which one, and being able to ask at any given moment, is this a river I am crossing, or a dry road? Is this a raft I still need, or one I have been carrying past its usefulness? A man once told me he had been protecting himself from vulnerability for 30 years. Something had happened at 19 that had taught him, correctly at the time, that trusting people was dangerous. He had built, from that lesson, a very solid raft, and it had worked. It had gotten him across many rivers, but he was 51 now, and the rivers of 19 were not the rivers of 51, and the raft had gotten very heavy, and the people who stood on the far bank waiting for him to arrive were asking, with increasing gentleness and increasing weariness, when he was going to set it down. Right now, as you rest, is there a raft on your shoulders? Something you built to cross a river that you have already crossed? A story about who you are, a way of being in the world, a protection or a habit or a belief that served you genuinely once in a real river and now sits heavy on your back on a dry road. You can put it down, not throw it away. You built it with care, and it worked, and it may have saved you. But you can set it here, on the bank, where it rests easily and does not need to be carried. The road ahead is dry. Your stride will return when your shoulders are free. Tonight, as you rest, let the raft find the bank. Let the things you built to survive the hard crossings rest now, here, in the dark. You are on the far shore. The town is close. The fire is warm. You can arrive. You can arrive now. The bell sounds, very faint now, from a great distance, like something heard across water, still there, still sounding, barely. And so the fifth story rests. Set it here, on the bank. You are on the far shore now. Breathe. In slowly, hold gently, and out, long, unhurried. The breath of someone who does not need to be anywhere. Your body knows how to do this. Let it. You may be very close to sleep now. That is good. That is exactly right. Let these next stories carry you the rest of the way. You don't need to follow every word. The words will do their work even as you move into the deeper quiet. Simply rest and receive, and let the current carry you. The sixth story comes from the bank of a river in ancient India. A monk, a scorpion, and a question about whether compassion should stop when it costs something. The sixth story begins. Compassion is not complete until it includes those who are most difficult to love. Shantideva, Bodhikari Avatara. There was a monk who lived near a river in the foothills of ancient India, and his name in this telling is Ananda. Not the Ananda of the great tradition, but a simpler man of the same name, who had come to his practice late and held it with the particular dedication of someone who has found something important only after looking for a long time. Ananda was 53. He had been a merchant for most of his life, cloth primarily, and the dyes that came up from the southern ports, and occasionally the small luxuries that moved between the cities and the courts. He had been a competent merchant, neither dishonest nor especially honest, a man who occupied the middle ground of commerce with the comfort of someone who has never had to examine his choices very closely, because the choices have always produced acceptable results. Then, in his late 40s, something had shifted. He could not say exactly what. A friend had died young. A business had failed, not catastrophically, not ruin, but the kind of failure that exposes the thinness of the securities you had built around yourself. He had sat in his empty warehouse one November evening and understood, with great clarity and considerable discomfort, that he had spent the preceding 30 years building a life rather than living one. He had found his way eventually to a monastery. Not immediately. The path from that warehouse to the monastery had taken 4 years and several wrong turns. But eventually, he had been ordained at 51. He had been practicing for 2 years when this story takes place. His practice was meditation. He sat each morning beside the river on a flat gray stone that he had smoothed further with the 2 years of his daily presence. He sat in the early morning, before the birds had reached their full morning chorus, before the light had come fully over the hills to the east, and he worked with his mind in the way that his teacher had described, watching, noticing, not grasping, not pushing away, returning when he had wandered, returning again and again and again. He was not good at it yet, but he was honest about this, which was already an improvement over the merchant who had been certain he was good at most things. One morning, as he sat on his gray stone in the pre-dawn quiet, he heard a sound in the water near his feet. He opened his eyes. A scorpion was in the shallows at the edge of the river. It had somehow entered the water, caught by the current, perhaps, or fallen from the bank above, and it was struggling. Scorpions are not swimmers. Its legs moved with the frantic efficiency of something that knows it is dying and has not yet accepted this. Ananda reached down and took the scorpion from the water. The scorpion stung him. He released it by reflex. It fell back into the water. He looked at his hand, the swelling already beginning. The particular sharp heat of the venom spreading from the small wound. He put the hand in the river. He breathed. Then he reached down again. The scorpion stung him again. Same hand. A second welt rising beside the first. He released it again. It fell. He looked at his hand. He looked at the scorpion fighting the current. He reached down a third time. A farmer who had been walking the bank at that early hour, a man named Govinda, heading to the fields above, had watched this entire sequence. He stopped. He looked at Ananda, who was now holding the scorpion carefully, moving it toward the bank, setting it in the grass above the water line, watching it regather itself and move off into the undergrowth with the self-possessed efficiency of a scorpion who has already forgotten its near drowning. Ananda put his hand back in the cool river. 3 stings. The hand was significantly swollen. "Are you mad?" Govinda said from the bank above. He said this with genuine curiosity rather than hostility, the tone of a man encountering something that genuinely does not fit his existing understanding of how people behave. "It stung you 3 times. Why would you keep reaching for it?" Ananda looked up at him. He seemed to be thinking about the question, rather than already having the answer. "It is the scorpion's nature to sting," he said at last. "What would you have me do? Abandon my nature to save because it has not abandoned its nature to sting?" Govinda looked at him for a moment. He did not have an immediate answer to this. It seemed to him, standing on the bank with his hoe over his shoulder in the early morning, that this was the kind of thing that required more thinking about than he had time to give it right now. He continued toward the fields, carrying the question with him. Ananda sat back on his gray stone. His hand ached. The sun was coming over the hills now, the first real light touching the river's surface and turning it briefly, beautifully, to copper. He thought about what he had said. He was not sure he had said it because he believed it. He was not sure it had come from a clear place of principle. It might have come from something more instinctive, from an old merchant's habit of valuing what can be saved, from some stubborn quality of his that refused to watch a thing die when a hand could prevent it. He was not certain his act had been wisdom. He was not certain it had been compassion in the deepest sense. But he noticed this. The act had not been conditional. He had not reached for the scorpion the first time because he calculated that the sting would be mild enough to be worth it. He had reached because the thing was drowning, and he was there. He had reached again because it was still drowning, and he was still there. He had reached a third time because, And here was the part that surprised him most, when he sat with it honestly, because if he had not reached the third time, something in him would have broken. Some quality of his practice, his intention, the thing he was trying to become, would have bent or snapped under the weight of having decided that his comfort mattered more than the thing he had decided to save. This is karuna, compassion, as it lives in the Buddhist and broader South Asian traditions. Not the performed compassion of a person who is kind when kindness is easy and comfortable. Not the conditional compassion that says, I will be generous until it costs me something real, but the compassion that is part of one's nature, not a decoration, not an achievement, but a quality as intrinsic as the scorpion's own nature, which the scorpion does not choose and does not revise based on circumstances. The later tradition tells of a disciple who came to a great teacher and said, I have tried to be compassionate, but I find that I am kind only when it is easy. When it costs something, I become less kind. How do I change this? The teacher said, you do not change it by trying to be kinder. You change it by understanding that the unkindness is not a character flaw to be corrected. It is a natural contraction, the self protecting itself from cost. The work is not to override the contraction. The work is to see it clearly without judgment and to ask, is this protection genuinely needed? Is the cost genuinely unaffordable? In most cases, when you see it clearly, the answer is no. The protection was not needed. The cost was not unaffordable. And compassion returns, not as an achievement, but as a recovery of what was always there. Ananda's aching hand was telling him something about the cost of his nature. It was a genuine cost. 3 stings, real swelling, real pain. He had not pretended the cost was nothing. He had simply decided that the cost was, in that morning, on that river, with that particular scorpion, affordable. A young woman once told me that she had stopped visiting her aging grandmother because the visits were too painful. Watching the decline, receiving the confusion, sitting with someone who no longer reliably recognized her. The pain was real. The cost was genuine. But she said, after some time, that the absence had created its own pain, a different kind, less acute, but more persistent. The pain of having let the contraction win, the pain of having decided that her discomfort mattered more than her grandmother's need for presence. She went back. The visits were still painful. The pain did not stop, but something else was present in it now. A quality of being aligned with her own nature, with who she wanted to be, that made the pain bearable in a way it had not been before. I was, she said, where I was supposed to be. even when it hurt. Right now, as you rest, is there somewhere you have withdrawn because the cost felt too high? Someone you have stopped reaching for because the reaching has hurt? Notice gently whether the withdrawal has actually reduced the pain or whether a different pain has grown in its place. Notice whether there is beneath the protection a nature that still wants to reach, that has always wanted to reach, and has simply been waiting for the moment when the self felt safe enough to let it. Tonight, as you rest, let that nature breathe. You don't have to decide anything. You don't have to act tonight. But you can let the part of you that reaches, that has always reached, even when it costs something, you can let it rest without judgment. You can allow that it is your nature. And your nature is not something to be managed or overridden. It is something to be recognized and gently, gradually trusted. The river moves past your gray stone. The light is copper on the water. Your hand is in the cool river. And the ache is real. And the ache is yours. And it is evidence of nothing except the cost of being the kind of person you are. That is not a small thing. The bell sounds from across the river now, it seems, or from across a great distance in the dark, barely audible, patient, still. And so the sixth story rests. Your nature is not something to be managed or overridden. It is something to be recognized and gently, gradually trusted. Let that land softly, without pressure, without turning it into a task for tomorrow or a judgment on today. You are very close to sleep now. Your body is heavy. Your breath is slow. The day is very far away. This is exactly right. This is the natural deepening that comes when a mind has been given good company for a while. Old stories, patient voices, the sense of being accompanied through the dark by something that has been accompanying people through the dark for a very long time. Nothing is required of you now. Not attention, not understanding, not the holding of anything in particular. Simply rest and receive, and let whatever comes next move through you the way music moves through a room. Present, then gone, leaving only the quality of having been there. The seventh story is a gentle one. It comes from a tea house in Kyoto in winter, and a cup that overflowed, and the strange relief of not already knowing the seventh story begins. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. Shunryu Suzuki, Zen mind, beginner's mind. In the winter of 1886, a professor of philosophy traveled from Tokyo to Kyoto. His name was Yamamoto Kenji, and he held a position at the Imperial University where he taught philosophy of mind, ethics, and the comparative study of Eastern and Western thought. He was 47 years old. He had spent 25 years building an intellectual life of considerable distinction. He had read everything, it seemed, that was worth reading about Zen and Confucianism and the Buddhist schools, and he had published several respected papers on the subject, and he had opinions about all of it that were refined and consistent and well-sourced. He had come to Kyoto because a colleague had told him, with a quality of quiet certainty that Yamamoto found slightly irritating, that there was a Zen teacher in the city, a master Nan-in, who was worth visiting. Yamamoto was not sure he needed to visit Zen masters. He had read the primary sources. He had read the commentaries. He had read the commentaries on the commentaries. He understood Zen in the sense that it could be understood, at least theoretically, at least from the outside. But the quality of his colleague's certainty had stayed with him. It was not the certainty of someone who had read about something. It was the certainty of someone who had received something. Yamamoto, who had spent 25 years reading about things, was not entirely certain he had received anything. This discomfort had grown quietly over the preceding months into a question he could not answer from the library. The house of Master Nan-in was modest, a small building set in a narrow street off the Philosopher's Walk, with a gate of old cedar and a garden visible through a gap in the wall. Raked gravel, a stone lantern, a plum tree that was bare in the winter cold. Yamamoto was shown inside by a student and left to wait in a simply furnished room while the master finished his morning practice. The room was almost entirely bare. A scroll on one wall, a painted brushstroke that might have been a circle, or might have been a breath, or might have been both. A small table, cushions on the floor. The quality of the room was very still. Not the stillness of emptiness, but the stillness of something that had been used for quiet purposes for a long time, the way a library smells of other people's attention. Master Nan-in entered without ceremony. He was older than Yamamoto had expected, perhaps 70, small, with a face that had the quality of very old paper, something that had been written on many times and held the impressions of all of it without becoming cluttered. He bowed. Yamamoto bowed back with more stiffness than he intended. "Tea," the master said. "Please," Yamamoto said. The preparation of the tea was unhurried. The master's hands moved through the ceremony with an economy that was not brusque, but complete. No wasted motion, no performance, but no minimalism either. The quality of someone doing something they have done 10,000 times and find still interesting. The tea bowl placed before Yamamoto. the fragrance of good tea rising in the cold room. Yamamoto began to speak. He spoke well. He laid out his intellectual engagement with Zen with the organized fluency of an academic who has lectured on this material many times. The history, the koans, the theory of sudden versus gradual enlightenment, his own view of the relationship between Zen practice and Western phenomenology, his questions about whether Kensho was a genuine epistemological event or a sophisticated form of cognitive dissolution, his doubts about the transmission model, his thoughts on the role of the teacher in creating conditions for. Master Nan-in reached for the teapot. He began to pour tea into Yamamoto's cup. Yamamoto, still speaking, watched the cup fill. The tea reached the rim. The master continued pouring. The tea spilled over the rim, ran across the lacquered tray, dripped from the edge of the table to the tatami floor between them. Yamamoto stopped speaking. The cup, it's overflowing, he said. Yes, the master said. He continued to pour. Please, stop. It's overflowing. The master set down the teapot. He looked at Yamamoto with an expression that was not unkind and not triumphant, simply direct. Like this cup, he said, you are full. You are so full of your knowledge, your opinions, your formulations about what Zen is, that there is no room. How can I show you Zen when you have already decided what Zen is? Yamamoto looked at the spilled tea on the tray. He felt something that was uncomfortable and also somehow clarifying. The sensation of being seen in a way he had not expected and could not dismiss. He was full. He could feel it now, with the master's question in the room between them. The specific fullness of someone who has learned to fill the cup before arriving anywhere, as a form of protection, who comes already knowing, because not knowing is uncomfortable, who has built his certainty into a kind of armor that keeps out not only embarrassment, but also, and here was the thing that landed most sharply, also surprise, also discovery, also the specific aliveness that belongs only to genuine not knowing. Then how does a person empty the cup? He asked, more quietly. Stop pouring into it before you arrive, the master said. He sat back on his cushion. Come here as you come to a place you have never been, without the map you've already made. The map is not the territory. And the territory of this practice is one that maps have never captured and will never capture. They sat in silence for a while. The spilled tea dried slowly on the tray. Outside, the narrow Kyoto street carried its ordinary sounds. A cart, voices, the distant call of a vendor. And they moved through the room and continued on, like water past a stone. What would it feel like, the master asked eventually, to not know something? Yamamoto thought about this. He thought about the last time he had genuinely not known something, not just not known a specific fact, but not known the shape of a thing, not known what he thought about it, or felt about it, or how it related to the things he already understood. "I'm not sure," he said slowly. "I think it would feel uncomfortable." "Yes," the master said. "At first, uncomfortable, like the cold of a room you have just entered from somewhere warm. But then, and this is the thing, your body adjusts. The room is the same temperature. You simply begin to feel it differently." He paused. "Not knowing is the same temperature as knowing. It is not lesser. It is simply different. And for certain kinds of learning, it is the only temperature at which learning can happen." Yamamoto left the tea house 2 hours later. The winter afternoon was clear and very cold. The late light turning the famous maples of the Philosopher's Walk into something still and dark against the sky. He walked slowly. He felt lighter in a way that was slightly disorienting. Lighter in the way that a bag that has been set down creates a disorientation in the arms that have been carrying it. The phantom weight sensation of something that has been there long enough to feel structural. He had been carrying his knowing. He had not understood until the cup overflowed that carrying his knowing was a choice that had costs he had not assessed. He returned to Master Nan-in 3 times over the following winter. He came, each time, with more empty space in the cup than the time before. He never fully achieved the beginner's mind that Shunryu Suzuki would later describe so precisely. The mind that holds many possibilities because it has not already decided which one is real. But he moved toward it. He practiced the discomfort of not knowing, and the discomfort became, gradually, something he could sit in without immediately reaching to fill. In the Zen tradition, this is Shoshin, beginner's mind, the quality of openness and receptivity that is the prerequisite for genuine learning. Suzuki Roshi described it. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. Letting go in this context is not the letting go of anger or grief. It is the letting go of certainty, of the story we have already completed about what a thing is, before we have encountered the thing itself. It is one of the subtler and more persistent forms of holding on, the clutching at what we already know, because what we already know is ours, is safe, is a property of the self we have assembled and do not want disturbed. A student told me once that she had spent years being unable to hear criticism from her teachers. Not because she was arrogant, she was not, but because her sense of herself was so carefully assembled, so deliberately constructed from her achievements and her understanding, that even mild correction felt like a threat to the structure. She was, in Nan-in's terms, a full cup. Every time someone offered her something new, the cup overflowed and she mopped up the spill and nothing changed. What changed was when she allowed herself not to know. When she asked a question and then, and this was the hard part, did not immediately begin constructing her answer while the other person was still speaking. When she sat in the space of the question, when she let the cup be less than full, it felt, she said, like being young again, like when you first encounter something and the whole thing is new, and you don't have any defenses against how interesting it is. Right now, as you rest, is there something you already know the answer to that might be worth not knowing, just for a while? Some long-held certainty about yourself, about someone you love, about how something is and will always be, that you have been carrying in your cup so long that there is no room for anything new to arrive. Tonight, as you rest, let the cup have some room in it. Not empty, not a void, not an erasure of what you know and have learned. Just room, just a little space between the surface of the tea and the rim of the cup. Room for what comes next to arrive without immediately spilling over. Beginners are not inferior to experts in this one thing, in the capacity to receive. They are vastly richer. Tonight, be a beginner. Receive rest as though you have never rested before and are not yet certain what it is and are curious to find out. The tea room is quiet. The winter light has left the window. The plum tree in the garden is dark against the dark, and the cup, just this much room left in the cup, just this much space, just room for sleep to arrive and settle and fill what is waiting. The bell sounds, only silence where the bell was, and then there, just there, one last faint note from somewhere too far away to locate, but present, patient, and then quiet. And so the seventh story rests. Be a beginner. Receive rest as though you have never rested before and are not yet certain what it is and are curious to find out. You are very close now, very close to where sleep lives, to the place the body has been moving toward since you first lay down. And let the day go. Let your body be entirely heavy. Let your breath come and go without any management at all. No shaping, no directing, no counting. Simply breathing, the way the body always breathes when no one is watching it. easy, natural, sufficient. Let your face go soft. The tiny muscles around the eyes, the jaw, the space between the eyebrows where the day sometimes lodges and stays. Let all of that go quiet. Let the dark behind your closed eyes simply be dark. The eighth and final story is a quiet one, perhaps the quietest of the night. It comes from a monastery in winter, from a dying master, and from the last teaching, which arrived not in words at all, only in a smile. The eighth story begins. Die before you die and discover there is no death. Sufi sang, echoed in Zen. The great matter of life and death is the practice itself. In a monastery in the mountains, let it be winter, because the story calls for winter, for the particular stillness of a world covered in snow and turned inward. There was a master whose time had come. His name was Roshi Mumon, and he had led the monastery for 38 years. He was 84. His body, which had served him faithfully through decades of rigorous practice, was releasing what it had held. He had moved to the small room nearest the garden, where the winter light came in through paper windows and filled the room with its even gray-white luminosity, the color of a sky that is entirely cloud and no cloud at all, the color of something that is fully itself. His students continued the monastery's practice in his absence. The bells still rang the hours. The meditation hall was still full at each period. The ordinary work of the monastery, the cooking, the cleaning, the maintenance of the paths and the buildings, went on with the quiet continuity of a river that does not stop for anything. This is the monastic tradition's great wisdom. Practice continues not because everything is well, but because practice is the response to everything, both wellness and difficulty. One of his students, a monk of 20 years named Daichi, was struggling. Daichi had come to the monastery at 26, the year after his mother died, and he had found there something he had not found anywhere else, a way of meeting the fact of impermanence without being destroyed by it. Roshi Mumon had been his teacher from the beginning, his assigned teacher in the formal sense, and in the deeper sense of the word, the person whose understanding had oriented Daichi's own. For 20 years, Daichi had sat in Sanzen with Mumon twice a week, bringing his practice, his questions, his confusions, his occasional glimpses of something clearer. For 20 years, the rhythm of those meetings had been the rhythm of his inner life. And now, Mumon was dying, and Daichi did not know how to hold this. He was not new to impermanence. He had practiced with it for 20 years. He had sat with the teachings on Anicca. the constant arising and passing of all phenomena, the truth that nothing holds, nothing persists in its form, not sensation, not relationship, not the body, not the mind. He knew this. He had sat with it until it was not merely a concept, but something he could feel in the texture of a breath, in the way a sound arises and passes, in the way a thought appears and is gone before the next thought arrives. But knowing impermanence and sitting with the impermanence of this teacher, this voice, this specific quality of attention that had, for 20 years, met him precisely where he was. These were different things. He visited the room every day. He sat with Mumon in the winter afternoons, the gray light through the paper windows, the small charcoal heater in the corner putting out its steady warmth. Sometimes Mumon talked, less now than before, the energy for words diminishing with the body's overall retreat, but sometimes clear, sometimes with a quality of presence that seemed, if anything, more concentrated than it had been when the body was well. Sometimes he slept, and Daichi sat beside him and listened to his breathing and tried to do what the practice said to do: be here fully with what is. He kept asking for a final teaching, not in those words, not directly, never that nakedly, but around the edges. Teacher, is there something I should understand that I don't yet understand? Teacher, is there something you want me to carry forward? Teacher, what do I do when you are gone? Mumon listened to these questions with the same quality of attention he had always brought, and he said nothing for a long time. And then he would say something small and sideways, a line from a sutra, a koan Daichi already knew, a gesture toward something Daichi could not quite grasp. Daichi was looking for something to hold. He understood this about himself. He was looking for a teaching he could carry, something final and complete and portable that he could take out and examine after the teacher was gone and say, yes, this was what he meant. This was the last thing. This is what I will use. He did not understand yet that this looking was the thing that was in the way. The day the story arrives at is a Tuesday in February, the coldest morning of the winter. The snow in the garden was perfect and undisturbed, the kind of snow that has fallen without wind and lies in exact horizontal layers on every surface. The stone lantern, the bare branches of the plum tree, the lip of the water basin. The light through the windows was the same gray-white as always, but colder in quality, as though the winter had distilled itself down to its essential temperature. Daichi sat beside Mumon's bed. Mumon was awake. His eyes were open, and they had the quality they had had for the last several weeks, not dim, not withdrawn, but simplified, as though everything that had not been necessary had already been released, and what remained was only what mattered: presence, breath, the gray-white light. Daichi sat for a while without speaking. Then, unable to stop himself, he said, "Teacher, is there anything at all that you want me to know?" Mumon looked at him. A long moment passed. The charcoal heater ticked. The snow in the garden did not move. And then Mumon smiled, not a performed smile, not the polite smile of social occasion, or the brave smile of a person managing difficulty. A real smile, a smile of such complete and natural ease that it transformed the room, not dramatically, but the way a lamp transforms a room, by being fully itself, without effort, without any intention of transformation. He smiled, and then his eyes closed, and his breathing continued, soft and even, the breath of someone who has set everything down and is moving into a wide, quiet space. Daichi sat for a long time after that. He was not crying. He was not waiting for anything. He was simply there, in the room, with the gray-white light and the snow in the garden, and the sound of the monastery continuing its practice in the halls beyond the door. The smile was the teaching. He understood this not immediately, not in the room, not on that day, but gradually over the following weeks and months, as he sat with it in the way that certain teachings require. The teaching was this: peace of this depth. The peace of that smile does not arrive from holding on. It arrives from the complete release of holding. Mumon had smiled not because there was something left to grasp, not because he had finally gotten the answer, not because he was performing acceptance. He had smiled because there was nothing left to hold. Every conclusion, every identity, every role, every relationship in its form of form, all of it already given back. And in the absence of all of that, in the open hands and the open mind and the body that was doing its final work of releasing, in that only peace remained. Only this, only the gray-white light and the snow and the sound of the monks at practice, and the simple fact of being alive, breathing, here, parinibbana. In the Theravada tradition, this is the term for the final passing of a fully realized being. But the Zen tradition is clear. The peace of complete release is not available only at death. It is available now. It is available in any moment when the self that holds stops holding, when the hand opens, when the case is dropped, when the rehearsal ceases and the present moment is simply met, without an agenda, without a performance, without anything required of it. The dying master's smile is the smile of someone who is finished carrying, not someone who has arrived at a conclusion, not someone who has won an argument, not someone who has figured it out, someone who has set everything down, including the question of whether they've figured it out, and is simply here in the gray-white light, breathing, open, at ease. A hospice nurse told me once about a patient in his final weeks, a man who had lived with great tension, with a long habit of control and vigilance, who had spent most of his life preparing for things that might go wrong. In his final days, as the body released its grip on everything it had held, something shifted. She said, "He became the kindest person I've ever sat with. All the tension was gone. He would hold my hand when I came in, and he would look at me, and I could feel. I can't explain it better than this. I could feel how little he needed from the moment. He'd stopped needing the moment to be anything. And in that not needing, he was the most present person in the room. That presence, that quality of not needing, is available now, not just at the end, now, in this moment. In this dark room, in this bed, with this quiet. You don't have to wait for the final letting go. You can practice it now in small and gentle increments, and each increment is the teaching. Each moment of open hands is the smile. Right now, as you rest, is there something you have been needing this moment to be? Something you have been waiting for tonight to deliver? Resolution, certainty, comfort, relief. Notice that needing. Hold it gently, and then ask, what if this moment, exactly as it is with the dark and the quiet and the slow breathing and the weight of the day, what if this is already enough? What if rest doesn't need to do anything more than this? Be here, soft, quiet, present. Tonight, as you rest, let the dying master's smile be your sleep, not death. The practice of complete release in this small, available, perfectly ordinary moment. Open hands, a quiet chest, the gray-white light through the winter window, the snow in the garden, undisturbed. You have been carrying something. You have been carrying it faithfully and with great care and for a long time. You can smile now. You can let it go. The bell There is no bell now, only the silence where the bell was, only the space the bell sound has moved through and left behind, ringing still, in the way that true things ring, not with sound, but with presence, the silence of a bell that has done its work, the silence of a hand that is opened, the silence of a night that has been given over entirely to rest. And so the 8th story rests, and so now we rest. 8 stories. Let them move through you now, one by one, like the last notes of a long piece of music returning to silence. Bunchu in the dry season forest at Wat Pa Pong, setting down the coal that had burned in his hands for 11 years, and the particular relief of a chest that has finally released what it was guarding. Eishin and Ryoichi on the autumn road in the rain, and the young monk's discovery that he had carried a woman for miles in his mind without ever having touched the river, and the question that Eishin left hanging in the firelight like a gift. I set her down at the riverbank. Why are you still carrying her? Way the ferryman on his wide bend of the Han River, struck by an empty boat, and the strange, opening clarity of understanding that all the boats he had been angry at were empty, in the way that mattered, and the heat he had been carrying was always, entirely, his own. Somchai, in the forest light at Wat Pa Pong, carrying the gray-white stone until his arms shook, and then, the moment of setting it down, the wave of relief moving through the whole body like a long-held breath, finally released. Donnie, the traveler, standing on the far bank with the raft on his shoulders, on a dry road, in the evening light, and the farmer's quiet question, and the specific lightness of a walk that continues without the weight of a thing that has finished its work. Ananda, on his gray stone by the river, reaching again and again for the scorpion, his hand stung 3 times, the river moving past, the copper light on the water, and the understanding that his nature was his nature, and he would not abandon it because the scorpion had not abandoned its own. Yamamoto, in the tea house, in winter Kyoto, watching the cup overflow and feeling for the first time in 25 years of knowing everything, the strange lightness of not knowing, the room that opens in the mind when certainty makes space for something new to arrive. And Daichi, in the room with the gray-white light and the snow in the garden, receiving the one teaching that had no words, the dying master's smile, the open hands, the peace that was always available, right here in this ordinary moment, for the person willing to stop holding long enough to feel it. These stories are yours now. You don't need to remember them tomorrow. You don't need to carry them anywhere. Simply let them have been here with you tonight, in the dark, as you traveled toward sleep. Let them have done their work, whatever that work was. Let them rest here as you rest. A blessing now. The oldest one, from the oldest part of this tradition. The metta prayer, the prayer of loving kindness, which has been offered at the end of countless practices, and countless languages, and countless monasteries and villages, and forest clearings for 25 centuries. May you be free from suffering. May you be free from fear. May you be at peace. May those you love be free from suffering. May those you love be free from fear. May those you love be at peace. May all beings in all directions, in all the worlds there are, may they be free from suffering. May they be free from fear. May they be at peace. And may you specifically, who have traveled through this long evening and these 8 old stories, may you be met tonight by the rest your body has been asking for. May your mind grow still. May whatever you have been carrying tonight find its way to the floor beside the bed and rest there without you, and be there in the morning if you still need it. But tonight, be released from it. The oil lamp still burns in the monastery window. The single flame, steady, patient, entirely itself. The stone paths are quiet beneath the night sky. The forest is still. There is nothing more to do. Only rest. Only this. Only you here, breathing. Sleep well.